So web services are pretty simple to start with, at least in concept. I have XML coming in, I have XML going back. If I can format some text, I can get some text back. And libraries help me with that. But we can actually do easier than that. We can go much simpler than that by making a few standard assumptions. So most of our web services come into the format of create, read, update, and delete. That's what I expect to have happen out of there. I'm going to read a bunch of objects. I'm going to read one object. I'm going to modify a bunch of objects. I'm going to create one object. I'm going to delete an object. And when I know that the primary things I'm going to happen is, that means if I'm going to have a method create a product, update an object, update a product, modify a product, delete a product, then I'm going to have a customer. I can create a customer. I can update a customer. I can modify a customer. I delete a customer, find a customer, that sort of thing. Then all of my services start to look the same. So do I really want to have to copy and paste, change the name from product to customer, copy and paste, change the name from customer to order, copy and paste, change the name from order to return, so on and so forth, when most of it's the same? Well, the inventors of REST said, no, of course you don't want to do that. That's too much manual grunt work. So they created this thing called representational state transfer, or REST for short, which defines that pattern of interaction. I'm going to have a create, a read, an update, and delete. And for create, I'm going to have you send in a specific HTML request. And for delete, I'm going to have you send a specific HTML request. And you're going to post here, and you're going to get here, and you're going to delete here, and you're going to put here. That's basically exactly the way that the REST works behind the scenes. So it's going to simplify, instead of you having to create different XML definitions for each one of these things, you can create most of these requests with no additional SOAP or XML, and just simply the XSD-based stuff of defining what your object looks like. Hey, you give me this object, I'm going to do some work with it. And so the key behind all this is the URL that you're going to use. So I'm going to point a URL to a path. So in this case, I can say, I have my application running on localhost, whatever I'm going to name the thing inside of there. I have the resources I'm working with, and so I can ignore all the first part of this. But now I'm dealing with students. And I'm not just dealing with all students. I'm dealing with a specific student, which is given an ID internally. To be in a database, you have to have a unique identifier typically. Certainly for this type of services, you have to have a unique identifier. And the unique identifier is a number, 1334. And so when I have this URL, all the work I do within this URL is around this specific object, 1334. I can get it, I can update it, I can modify it, I can add it, I can delete it, I can do all sorts of interesting things just by the simple act of formulating this URL, of which 90% of it is common. 5% of it is just what class am I dealing with, and the other 5% is what ID of the number I'm dealing with. It allows me to focus and work with that single object. So if I want to get this object, here's a GET request that returns me back either JSON or XML for this object. So given that, why do I use REST versus SOAP? Because REST looks ridiculously simple. Literally, the function behind REST is I write really simple calls. To get it, boom, you saw the URL. To change it, I create XML representing that object. I do a post. Not put, excuse me. To modify it, I take the same XML structure. I do a post. To delete it, I do the same XML structure. I do a delete. Now, if you don't remember, we saw this when we talked about servlets in the previous week. The get, the post, the delete, those are operations in HTTP. So I simplify my design. I don't have to remember, did you name it update, or did you name it modify, or did you name it delete, or did you do it erase, or what's the WSDL look like, and do I have to map to a WSDL, and where do I find that WSDL? All that stuff from web services is taken off the table. I know exactly, if you give me the URL, these are the protocols by which I do it. Now, some of the issues inside of REST is it's way simpler, but the security is a little bit tougher. It doesn't have the same as WS security. I need to find security, and REST has definitely evolved over time in security. It's not unsecure. At first it was, but now there's some security starting to form. It's just much easier to figure out that protocol universally when you use WS security over the top of it. The idea of REST is supposed to be easy access, and so if you have super secure stuff, it kind of is counterintuitive in how that's going to work. SOAP still exists as a viable option. One, you generate most of the stuff anyway, so whether you do REST or SOAP, there's not a certain huge amount of efficiency. It's really the question of how do I interface between the two of them, the client and the server. But SOAP is the only way to have exact behavior. If you want more than create, read, update, and delete, I have to create SOAP standards. If I want to have a service like go buy something, you're not going to create your own order object and put it together. I'm going to create a service that says, hey, add to shopping cart. I have a service to say, hey, check out now. Things like that. So REST is only really good in dealing with whole objects with minimal rules, with minimal business process involved. If I can just create, read, update, delete, it's great. Past that, kind of minimal operations. So I don't use a lot of REST operations past just get on a website. If I'm going to have interface between two servers, then I can get away with it if I'm going to just have create, read, update, and delete anyway. The biggest thing about SOAP is it gives us exactly the ability to define the functionality we want, and it gives us clear standards around transport and security using WS security. So they're both good options. I want you to be aware of both of them so that way you can choose appropriately as you go through and design web services sometime in your future career.